Hello, and welcome to my channel, Reading Little Blue Books, out loud. This is a Little Blue Book. It happens to be Little Blue Book number 24, and it is titled The Kiss and Other Stories by Anton Chekhov. There is no copyright date on this one. And this is part 4, and we left off at the end of the last story, and the new story is A Trifling Occurrence. Nikolai Ilyich Byliev, a Petersburg landlord, very fond of the racecourse, a well-fed, pink young man of about 22, once called, towards evening, on Madame Ernin, Olga Ivanova, with whom he had a liaison, or, to use his own phrase, spun out a long and tedious romance. And indeed, the first pages of his romance, pages of interest and inspiration, had been read long ago. Now they dragged on, and presented neither novelty nor interest. Finding that Olga Ivanova was not at home, my hero lay down a moment on the drawing-room sofa and began to wait. "Good evening, Nikolai Ilyich," he suddenly heard a child's voice say. "Mother will be in a moment. She's gone to the dressmaker's with Sonya." In the same drawing-room on the sofa lay Olga, Ivanova's son. Alyosha, a boy about 8 years old, well-built, well looked after, dressed up like a picture in a velvet jacket and long black stockings. He lay on a satin pillow, and apparently imitating an acrobat whom he had lately seen in the circus, lifting up first one leg then the other. When his elegant legs began to be tired, he moved his hands, or he jumped up impetuously, and then went on all fours, trying to stand with his legs in the air. All this he did with a most serious face, breathing heavily, as if he himself found no happiness in God's gift to such a restless body. "Ah, how do you do, my friend?" said Byliev. B-I-E-L, Layev. Byliev. "Is it you? I didn't notice you. Is your mother well?" In the moment, Alyosha had been taken hold of the toe of his left foot in his right hand and got into a most awkward pose. He turned head over heels, jumped up, and glanced from under the big fluffy lampshade at Byliev. "How can I put it?" he said, shrugging his shoulders. "As a matter of plain fact, Mother is never well. You see, she's a woman, and women, Nikolai Ilyich, have always some pain or another." For something to do, Byliev began to examine Alyosha's face. All the time he had been acquainted with Olga Ivanova, he had never once turned his attention to the boy, and had completely ignored his existence. A boy is stuck in front of your eyes, but what is he doing here? What is his role? You don't want to give a single thought to the question. It's a strange story. In the evening dusk, Alyosha's face, with a pale forehead and steady black eyes, unexpectedly reminded Byliev of Olga Ivanova. As she was in the first pages of the romance, he had the desire to be affectionate to the boy. Okay, that's a little weird. "Come here, whippersnapper," he said. "Come and let me have a good look at you, quite close." The boy jumped off the sofa and ran to Byliev. "Well," Nikolai Ilyich began, putting his hand on the thin shoulders, "and how are things with you? How shall I put it? They used to be much better before." "How?" "Quite simple. Before Sonya and I only had to do music and reading, and now we're given French verses to learn. You've had your hair cut lately." Yes, just lately. That's why I noticed it. Your beard's shorter. May I touch it? Doesn't it hurt? No, not a bit. Why is it that it hurts if you pull one hair, and when you pull a whole lot it doesn't hurt? A bit. Aha! You know, it's a pity that you don't have side whiskers. You should shave here and to the sides, and leave the hair just here. The boy pressed close to Belyaliev and began to play with his watch chain. When I go to the gymnasium, he said, Mother is going to buy me a watch. I'll ask her to buy me a chain just like this. What a fine locket. Father has one just the same, but yours has stripes here, and his has got letters. Inside its mother's picture. Father has another chain now, not in links, but like a ribbon. How do you know? Do you see your father? No, Alyosha blushed, and in the violent confusion of being detected in a lie, began to scratch the locket busily with his fingernail. Belyaliev looked steadily at the face and asked, Do you see your father? No. But be honest, on your honor. By your face, I can see you're not telling me the truth. If you made a slip of the tongue by mistake, what's the use of shuffling? Tell me, do you see him? As one friend to another? Alyosha mused. And you won't tell Mother? He asked. What next? On your word of honor, my word of honor. Swear an oath. What a nuisance you are. What do you take me for? Alyosha looked round, made big eyes, and began to whisper. Only for God's sake don't tell Mother. Never tell it to anyone at all, because it's a secret. God forbid that Mother should ever get to know. Then I and Sonia and Pelagia will pay for it. Listen, Sonia and I met Father every Tuesday and Friday, when Pelagia takes us for a walk before dinner. We go into Apfel's sweet shop, and Father's waiting for us. He always sits in a separate room, you know, where there's a splendid marble table and an ashtray shaped like a goose without a back. And what do you do there? Nothing. First we welcome one another, then we sit down at a little table, and Father begins to treat us to coffee and cakes. You know, Sonia eats meat pies, and I can't bear pies with meat in them. I like them made of cabbage and eggs. We eat so much that afterwards at dinner we try to eat as much as we possibly can, so that Mother shan't notice. What do you talk about there? To Father? About anything. He kisses us and cuddles us, tells us all kinds of funny stories. You know, he says that he will take us to live with him when we are grown up. Sonia doesn't want to go, but I say yes, of course. It'll be lonely without Mother, but I'll write letters to her. How funny. We could go to her for our holidays then, couldn't we? Besides, Father says that he'll buy me a horse. He's a splendid man. I can't understand why Mother doesn't invite him to live with her, or why she says we mustn't meet him. He loves Mother very much indeed. He's always asking us how she is and what she's doing. When she was ill, he took hold of his head like this and ran all the time. He is always telling us to obey and respect her. Tell me, is it true that we're unlucky? How? Father says so, he says. You are unlucky children. He's quite strange to listen to him. He says, you are unhappy. I'm unhappy, and Mother's unhappy, he says. Pray to God for yourselves and for her. Alyosha's eyes rested upon the stuffed bird, and he mused. Exactly, snorted Belyaliev. This is what you do. You arrange conferences and sweet shops, and your Mother doesn't know. No. How could she know? Pelagia won't tell for anything. The day before yesterday, Father stood us pears, sweet like jam. I had two. Well, now, Tell me, doesn't your father speak about me? About you? How shall I put it? Alyosha gave a searching glance at Belyaliev's face and shrugged his shoulders. He doesn't say anything in particular. What does he say, for instance? You won't be offended? What next? Why, does he abuse me? He doesn't abuse you, but you know. He is cross with you. He says that it's through you that Mother's unhappy, and that you ruined Mother. But he is so queer. I explain to him that you are good and never shout at Mother, but he only shakes his head. Does he say those very words, that I ruined her? Yes. Don't be offended, Nikolai Ilyich. Belyayev got up, stood still a moment, and then began to walk about the drawing room. This is strange and funny, he murmured, shrugging his shoulders and smiling ironically. He is to blame all around, and now I've ruined her, eh? What an innocent lamb. Did he say those very words to you, that I ruined your mother? Yes, but you said that you wouldn't get offended. I'm not offended, and it's none of your business. No, it's quite funny, though. I fell into the trap, yet I'm to be blamed as well. The bell rang. The boy dashed from his place and ran out. In a minute a lady entered the room with a little girl. It was Olga Ivanova, Alyosha's mother. After her, hopping, humming noisily, and waving his hands, followed Alyosha. Of course, who is there to accuse except me? He murmured, sniffing. He's right. He's the injured husband. What's the matter? Asked Olga Ivanova. What's the matter? Listen to the kind of sermon your dear husband preaches. It appears I'm a scoundrel and a murderer. I've ruined you and the children. All of you are unhappy, and only I am awfully happy. Awfully, awfully happy. I don't understand, Nikolai. What is it? Just listen to this young gentleman, Belyaliev said, pointing to Alyosha. Alyosha blushed, then became pale suddenly, and his whole face was twisted in fright. Nikolai Ilyich, he whispered loudly. Shh! Ask him, if you please, went Belyaliev. That stupid fool, Pelyalgia, of yours, takes them to sweet shops and arranges meetings with their dear father there. But that's not the point. The point is that the dear father is a martyr, and I'm a murderer. I'm a scoundrel who broke the lives of both of you. Nikolai Ilyich, moaned Alyosha. You gave your word of honor. Ah, let me alone. Belyaliev waved his hand. This is something more important than any words of honor. The hypocrisy revolts me, the lie. I don't understand, muttered Olga Ivanovna, and tears began to glimmer in her eyes. Tell me, Lyolka. She turned to her son. Do you see your father? Alyosha did not hear and looked with horror at Belyaliev. It's impossible, said the mother. I'll go and ask Pelagia. Olga Ivanova went out. But you gave me your word of honor, Alyosha said, trembling all over. Belyaliev waved his hand at him and went on walking up and down. He had abandoned in his insult, and now, as before, he did not notice the presence of the boy. He, a big, serious man. Had nothing to do with boys, and Alyosha sat down in a corner and in terror told Sonia how he had been deceived. He trembled, stammering, wept. This was the first time in his life that he had been set, roughly, face to face with a lie. He had never known before that in this world, besides sweet pears and cakes and expensive watches, there exist many other things which have a name in children's language. Strange stories. Next story. after the theater. Nadia Zelenina had just returned with her mother from the theater, where they had been to see the performance of Yevgeny Onegin. Entering her room, she quickly threw off her dress, loosened her hair, and sat down hurriedly in her petticoat and a white blouse to write a letter in the style of Tatiana. "I love you," she wrote, "but you don't love me. No, you don't." The moment she had written this, she smiled. She was only 16 years old, and so far she had not been in love. She knew that Gorny, the officer, and Gronsdev, the student, loved her, but now, after the theater, she wanted to doubt their love. To be unloved and unhappy. How interesting. There is something beautiful, affecting, romantic in the fact that one loves deeply while the other is indifferent. Onegin is interesting because he does not love at all, and Tatiana is delightful because she is very much in love. But if they loved each other equally and were happy, they would seem boring instead. "Don't go on protesting that you love me," Nadia wrote on, thinking of Gorny, the officer. "I can't believe you. You're very clever, educated, serious. You have a great talent and perhaps a splendid future waiting. But I am an uninteresting, poor-spirited girl, and you yourself know quite well that I shall only be a drag upon your life. It's true I carried you off your feet, and you thought you had met your ideal in me, but that was a mistake. Already you are asking yourself in despair, why did I meet this girl? Only your kindness prevents you from confessing it." Nadia pitied herself. She wept and went on. "If it were not so difficult for me to leave mother and brother, I would put on a nun's gown and go where my eyes direct me. You would then be free to love another if I were to die." Through her tears she could not make out what she had written. Brief rainbows trembled on the table, on the floor and the ceiling, as though Nadia were looking through a prism. Impossible to write. She sank back in her chair and began to think of Gorny. Oh, how fascinating, how interesting men are, Nadia remembered, and the beautiful expression of Gorny's face, appealing, guilty, and tender, when someone discussed music with him. The efforts he made to prevent the passion from sounding in his voice. Passion must be concealed in a society where cold reserve and indifference are the signs of good breeding. And he does try to conceal it, but he does not succeed, and everybody knows quite well that he has a passion for music. Never-ending discussions about music, blundering pronouncements by men who do not understand, keep him in incessant tension. He is scared, timid, silent. He plays superbly as an ardent pianist. If he were not an officer, he would be a famous musician. The tears dried in her eyes. Nadia remembered how Gorny told her of his love at a symphony concert and began downstairs by the cloakroom, and again downstairs by the cloakroom. "I am so glad you have at last made the acquaintance of the student Gronsdev," she continued to write. "He is a very clever man, and you are sure to love him. Yesterday he was sitting with us till 2 o'clock in the morning. We were all so happy. I was sorry that you hadn't come to us. He said a lot of remarkable things." Nadia laid her hands on the table and lowered her head. Her hair covered the letter. She remembered that Gronsdev also loved her, and that he had the same right to her letter as Gorny. Perhaps she had better write to Gronsdev, for no cause of happiness began to quicken in her breast. At first it was a little one, rolling about in her breast like a rubber ball. Then it grew broader and bigger and broke forth like a wave. Nadia had already forgotten about Gorny and Gronsdev. Her thoughts became confused. The happiness grew more and more. From her breast it ran into her arms and legs, and it seemed like a light, fresh breeze blew over her head, stirring her hair. Her shoulders trembled with quiet laughter. The table and the lamp glasses trembled. Tears from her eyes splashed the letter. She was powerless to stop her laughter and to convince herself that she had a reason for it. She hastened to remember something funny. "What a funny poodle," she cried, feeling that she was cloaking with laughter. "What a funny poodle." She remembered how Gronsdev was playing with Maxim the poodle after tea yesterday, how he told a story afterwards of a very clever poodle who was chasing a crow in the yard. The crow gave him a look and said, "Oh, you swindler!" The poodle did not know he had to do with a learned crow. He was terribly confused and ran away dumbfounded. Afterwards he began to bark. "No, I'd better love Gronsdev," Nadia decided, and tore up the letter. She began to think of the student, of his love, of her own love, with the result that the thoughts in her head swam apart, and she thought about everything, about her mother, the street, the pencil, the piano. She was happy thinking, and found that everything was good, magnificent. Her happiness told her that this was not all, that a little later it would be still better. Soon it will be spring, summer. They will go with mother to Gorbiki in the country. Gorny will come for his holidays. He will walk in the orchard with her and make love to her. Gronsdev will come too. He will play croquet with her and bulls. He will tell Fanny wonderful stories. She passionately longed for the orchard, the darkness, the pure sky, the stars. Again her shoulders trembled with laughter, and she seemed to awake to a smell of wormwood in the room, and a branch was tapping at the window. She went to her bed and sat down. She did not know what to do with the great happiness. It overwhelmed her. She stared at the crucifix, which hung at the head of her bed, saying, "Dear God, dear God, dear God." And I think we'll stop there. It's the end of part 4. And the end of that story. Strange Russian.